We found that in DC, the school office, the main office, was pushing employees to segregate themselves according to race. Another big issue out there is the critical race theory agenda that is really overtaking our schools, our government, our military, our culture. And as we've highlighted, it's repackaged Marxism, it's racism, it encourages discrimination and targeting of people on race in violation of the Constitution and virtually every discrimination law under the sun. And it needs to be stopped, it needs to be exposed, and by exposing it, we hope to stop it. And Judicial Watch is not waiting for the government to investigate this or the media to investigate this, because they're obviously not. Parents are concerned about this going on in the school districts, and they're doing a great job. Some parent activist groups and individual parents we know are doing some great work in that regard. Judicial Watch has been investigating the school abuses as well, working with parents informally and also doing our own FOIAs and lawsuits. But we noticed something was going on here in DC, so we filed a FOIA last year about so-called Affinity Spaces, which is a code word for segregation. And we found that in DC, the school office, the main office, was pushing employees to segregate themselves according to race. Again, the local DC government school district was encouraging employees to segregate themselves according to race, using tax dollars to shuffle people into affinity groups based on race. Incredible material that we've uncovered. The records include a DCPS, DC Public Schools, September 2021 PowerPoint presentation titled DCPS Affinity Group Interest Form. The Equity Strategy and Programming team initially launched Affinity Spaces as safe spaces for you to reflect and process following the murder of George Floyd. And we're going to continue them throughout the 21-22 school year as a place for folks to reflect and continue to learn and grow. One way to process in a safe space is through affinity. Affinity spaces are gathering opportunities for people who share a common identity. The space will be organized based on the racial identities represented in central office, as we aim to lean into the courageous conversation condition of isolating race. I'm not going to interpret the last part of that sentence because it sounds like racialist gobbledygook, but here we are hearing or seeing a DC government agency, DC Public Schools, encouraging the staff in their central office to segregate themselves by race. They say their teams will co-facilitate these affinity groups in collaboration with volunteers at least once a month, but more frequently as requested by the group. A form in the presentation, of course, asks respondents to submit their pronouns, and they include all sorts of pronouns which I think many people will find problematic and objectionable. The school staff is asked to select which racial affinity groups you plan to join via Teams. Now, Teams is a program available for collaboration, online collaboration. Select all that apply to you and your racial identities, and then you'll get a separate calendar invite, I guess, once you join the group. And the racial identities you're supposed to select from are Asian American Pacific Islander, Black African American, Hispanic Latinx, which is also objectionable. Tell a Hispanic person you know that they're Latinx. They'll probably look at you like you said something wrong to them. Indigenous Native American. Indigenous, what does that mean? Again, another left-wing way of dividing Americans. And then, of course, multiracial and white. And the other choice is, I'm not represented by any of these options and want to recommend another group. So who knows how many segregated race groups DC Public Schools headquarters are running. And the forum also gets into separating yourself by sexual identity. They want to know if you're interested in, the staffers are interested in LGBTQIA plus affinity spaces. And of course, then once you decide that you're interested in segregating yourself by sexual identity, then you're further segregated by race. Are you white LGBTQIA plus, or are you BIPOC LGBTQIA plus? Now, BIPOC is a new phrase. It's Black, Indigenous, People of Color. So that's the new phrase for further segregating Americans from each other. And so later they talk about how these groups are, they're going to have these come together to talk about what these segregated racial groups are doing. But then the group meetings are going to be led by people based on their race. So they have a schedule. The October meeting will be led by the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx affinity group. December to be led by the white affinity group, and they capitalize white, which is racist. February to be led by the black affinity group, and they capitalize black, which is racist. But when you have capitalizations of race like that, that echoes to apartheid South Africa. That's what they would do in apartheid South Africa. That changes the use of the word from a descriptor to a category based on other characteristics that are racially outrageous, in terms of just presuming that blacks share all these characteristics or whites share all sorts of other characteristics. It's unbelievable that this is going on in the government. Don't you agree? These shocking documents show in evident violation of the Constitution and civil rights laws that the public school system of our nation's capital has pushed blatant racial discrimination among its staff based on radical Marxist CRT principles. Now, the thing about Washington, D.C. is that even though there's this, what they call, there's a mayor and a council, all of that is at the sufferance of Congress. Because under the Constitution, our nation's capital is governed by the Congress. So if I were you, I would raise this with your congressman. Why are you allowing this to take place in our nation's capital? Because Congress can shut this down in a heartbeat. Of course, they're loath to do it because they pretend, oh, well, we have to let DC govern itself, even though the Constitution explicitly gives Congress the authority to govern the nation's capital for rather obvious reasons. But this is what's going on in our nation's capital. Now, we highlighted for you the CRT propaganda being force-fed our cadets in West Point a few weeks ago. By the way, they just gave the general responsible in part for that a promotion. He went from a 3rd star to a 4th star, and he's being sent over and given a promotion to go over to Europe for a job well done by instituting critical race theory concepts at West Point. And we have lawsuits on behalf of teachers and such who have been retaliated against for criticizing this agenda. And of course, many other litigations and FOIA requests throughout the country to expose it further. But I fear this is going on throughout the country. And in this case, you have employees of the DC public schools who are being victimized. Now, I know many of them may support this, but that doesn't matter. They're still being victimized. Civil rights laws prohibit this type of racial segregation, and that's what it is. And Judicial Watch has exposed it, not the media and not Congress. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.